To this now, making ends meet is becoming more and more difficult as prices remain high. To raise concern over this, unions are planning to take to the streets next week. The protest is planned for Wednesday, the 24th of this month. To speak to us further, we're joined by political economist Mandla Lionel Isaacs, who joins me now virtually. Mr. Isaacs, thank you very much for your time here on eNCA. Firstly, is this even advisable to shut down the country for 24 hours while people are already suffering?
Good afternoon to you and your listeners. It's a curious one. We understand that it's a difficult economic environment, rising interest rates, and in particular, of course, inflation, which is affecting South African consumers as well as consumers around the world. The challenge, though, is that the inflation has been driven by global dynamics. We know that during the pandemic, global supply chain issues began to cause inflationary pressure in a lot of areas. And of course, this has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, which has driven up global energy prices, oil, petrol, as well as food. And so, those drivers are not going to be, there's very little that the government can do. Of course, one of the big concerns or one of the big proposals coming from, it appears, the trade unions is for government to introduce a cap on fuel prices, which frankly is a terrible idea and is not going to address the problem and will cause another set of unintended negative consequences if government were to impose that.
And that's exactly what a lot of people have been asking themselves when they heard about this particular protest. What exactly can government do? Because all of this, we're here today not because of our own doing. Yes, of course, our country was already in a bad state before the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but that obviously exacerbated the issue. So what would you then advise these workers? Should they just stay at work? Some of them are saying they'll actually just stay away from work, which means services won't be rendered to people as well.
Well, I mean, you understand, the unions and different social partners wanting to raise these issues on government's agenda, to the extent that there may be a need to provide relief to low-income South Africans. That may be something that, the trade union should be engaging government on. And of course, it's quite curious because, COSATU at the very least, we understand that, SAFTU, which is not part of the governing alliance, is also calling for the strike. Both union federations are calling for the strike. But COSATU is part of the tripartite alliance with government and is part of the ruling alliance. Therefore, it has the ear of government and can address its concerns without needing to call a nationwide strike. So you'd think those might be better approaches to take. An issue of a cap on fuel prices is just undesirable. We've seen it in different countries. When government tries to artificially hold back prices, then you just see shortages because, producers are not going to, retailers are not going to sell a product at a negative margin or at a point where they're not able to make money because of a cap that's imposed. And what you'll start to see are just shortages, which can exacerbate, workers' quality of life and business disruption even further.
But what can our government do then? Because, of course, when you look at the rest of the world, Africa would be the most badly impacted by this. And already, like I said earlier, we were a struggling country economically with our unemployment rate so high, etc. So what can government do besides the fact that they tried to cut down on the fuel levy for a little bit? That relieved us, of course, but I think we need more relief.
Well, in the short term, there's been calls for perhaps deregulation of fuel retail, and the outgoing CEO of the Competition Commission has actually been calling for that, and that could reduce prices as retailers compete with one another by finding efficiencies in their operations to offer lower prices. So that's one scenario. You would hope, I'm not sure what the status of the strategic fuel reserves that government typically holds, through Petro SA and the Central Energy Fund and things, those entities, and of course some of those were sold in a murky fire sale a few years back. You would rely on, those kind of emergency fuel reserves to potentially introduce into the market at a time when global, oil supplies are unreasonably high. That would have been an option that you would like to have under your control. But in the longer term, it's going to be under government's, I guess, interest or to expand our fuel production, our food production, so that we have more local options in those regards, to not necessarily be dependent on global markets to the extent that we currently are.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us. This is always, news that makes us even more depressed, because sometimes there really is nothing that our government can do when it's something international that's causing us to be in this state. That was political economist Mandla Lionel Isaacs speaking to us there about SAFTU strike happening next week. And still to come on